Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the growing threat of a recession. The warnings of a recession coming as President Biden tries to bring down gas prices by withdrawing more oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a move some Republicans call political theater ahead of the upcoming elections.
Our oil reserves do not exist to win midterms. They exist to help this country in an emergency.
Saudi Arabia planning a major megacity in the desert, but some biblical scholars worry it could threaten some important ancient biblical locations.
So it's a multi-year project. We're just hoping that they don't not just ruin the view, but destroy anything of biblical significance out there.
China moving to keep President Xi Jingping in power, probably for the rest of his life. So what will that mean for the United States and the world?
It's clear that he is going to continue to lead the Chinese Communist Party forward. Things that people find terribly egregious about the Chinese Communist Party, in particular his leadership of the party, are going to continue and accelerate.
And celebrating biblical tradition in Jerusalem that goes back to the days of Moses.
The priests in the temple received the job to bless the people of Israel. Today, actually, they're gathering together thousands of Kohanim here to bless all the people of Israel.
All these stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with the growing threat to the economy. Top economists say this week is certain the U.S. will face a recession in the next year. It's a blow to President Biden, who's making moves to lower gas prices right before the midterm elections. CBN's Heather Sells is our top story.
On Wednesday, the president told Americans he understands their economic pain, especially at the pump, although he didn't use the word recession.
Families are hurting. You've heard me say it before, but I get it.
The latest Bloomberg projections show a 100% chance of a recession in the next year. And one of the world's top credit rating agencies now says the U.S. gross domestic product will grow by just 0.5% next year, down from earlier projections. In recent weeks, gas prices have dropped, with the average gallon costing $3.85. Still, that is up from $3.35 a year ago. It is bad math for families and the president, as polls show his approval ratings go down when gas prices go up. On Wednesday, he announced the release of another 15 million barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Reserve in an attempt to lower gas prices, all while denying any politics.
It's not politically motivated at all. It's motivated to make sure that I continue to push on what I've been pushing on.
Conservatives quickly disputed that.
Our oil reserves do not exist to win midterms. They exist to help this country in an emergency.
The timing is extremely political. Remember, also, this is an administration that basically begged Saudi Arabia to delay their production cuts by 1 month, not to cancel them, but to delay them by 1 month to get through the elections.
Biden's move brings the nation's oil stockpile to its lowest level in almost 40 years. He pledged Wednesday to restock it when oil prices drop to less than $70 a barrel, saying that would give U.S. companies the confidence to ramp up production. Still, in some mixed messaging, he scolded them for high gas prices.
You should be using these record-breaking profits to increase production and refining.
Meanwhile, Americans are struggling as they fill up their cars, watch their retirement accounts shrink, and interest rates soar. The Federal Reserve has jumbo-sized the rates to fight inflation, but it may be paving the way for recession.
I think it's unlikely that it can be avoided. The question is, how deep and how long it'll be.
The president's press secretary still says he does not anticipate a recession, citing new jobs and low unemployment. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Some say another inflationary threat could be on the way. More than 8 million people have applied for the Biden administration's debt forgiveness program. While the website officially launched this week, the plan's future is far from certain. Economists on both sides of the aisle say forgiving student debt will increase inflation. As Matt Galka reports, the program is also facing a number of court challenges.
Qualified borrowers could soon see $10,000 or $20,000 of their college loans wiped away. But critics are worried that this program could add to an already bad inflation problem throughout the country. More than 40 million people in the country may qualify for some student loan forgiveness. The process for applying officially went live this week, with more than 8 million people already filling out applications.
I'm surprised it's not actually more than that, given the gratuitous nature of this handout. We're talking about up to $40,000 for families making $250,000 a year.
The plan has been criticized for catering to those who had the advantage of going to college. But another criticism is how the program, which could cost $400 billion over the next decade, might impact already high inflation.
Every time Congress and the president spend a dollar that we don't have, and they need to borrow that money, that requires the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates harder and faster in order to keep inflation under control. And the more the Fed slams on the brakes of the car in this economy, the more people are going to go through the windshield. We have countless Americans now who can't afford a home because interest rates have gotten too high given home prices right now.
6 Republican-led states have sued to block the program. The president defended the plan when the application process launched this week.
Republican members of Congress and Republican governors are trying to do everything they can to deny this relief, even to their own constituents. As soon as I announced my administration's student debt plan, they started attacking it, saying all kinds of things. Their outrage is wrong and it's hypocritical. I will never apologize for helping working Americans and middle-class people as they recover from the pandemic.
The timing can't be ignored. With less than 3 weeks before pivotal midterm elections, Democrats are hoping the plan resonates with voters.
Particularly younger voters or those who are still paying off those debts, if they feel like it is going to help, that could be a boost. At the same time, the net result might not be what Democrats expect, because there are folks who believe it's not the right thing to do, and it's not fair to those who haven't had that debt.
While applications continue to pour in, the program could still end up in legal limbo as multiple cases make their way through the system. Meanwhile, the federal government's pause on student loan repayments that happened during the pandemic is formally set to end on January 1st. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Just a reminder for our viewers, if you miss an episode of CBN NewsWatch, you can still catch it on YouTube. You can find it by searching CBN NewsWatch Today using the search box on YouTube, and you can see older episodes as well. Coming up, Saudi Arabia planning to build a massive new modern city in the desert, but some biblical experts worry it could be a danger to some historic biblical locations. We'll explain why when we come back. Saudi Arabia is planning one of the most ambitious projects in history. It's a 160-mile-long, ultra-modern settlement in the middle of the remote northern desert. But this Saudi mega city may threaten some ancient biblical sites. Chuck Holton brings us the story from deep in the Saudi Arabian desert.
For now, the northwest corner of Saudi Arabia is home to more camels than people. That would certainly change if Crown Prince Salman's ambitious plans come to fruition. The heir to the Saudi throne recently announced this region as the site of his new $500 billion megacity called Neom.
Imagine a traditional city and consolidating its footprint, designing to protect and enhance nature.
The goal is for up to 9 million people to live here in what's touted as the world's most modern, forward-thinking, and climate-friendly city. Few people, however, know about the deep biblical history of this area. Those who do wonder if the megaproject would help or harm the region's historic value. Andrew Jones has studied biblical archaeology for more than a decade. CBN followed him on a week-long adventure to some fascinating biblical sites, places almost everyone has read about, but few will ever get to see. Jones believes Mount Sinai is actually located here, very close to the proposed site of the new Saudi megacity.
So the biggest issue is that Moses, when he was taking care of Jethro's flocks, now that was his father-in-law, and when he had fled Egypt, he lived in the land of Midian. And the land of Midian is in north of Saudi Arabia. There is no archaeological evidence for Midian in the Sinai Peninsula. And it was on one of those days when he was out with the flocks that it says he went to the mountain of God in the book of Exodus. And it says he saw a burning bush on Mount Sinai. So then you'll realize that Mount Sinai is close to the home where Jethro lived in the land of Midian.
His theory is that after crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites would have wandered in this very desert. As the team retraced their steps, it was easy to see why water was foremost in their minds. After the Israelites crossed the Red Sea in the end of Exodus chapter 15, it says that they came to the oasis called Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. Well, those 12 springs are still here. Here's one of them behind me that's been cemented in over the years, but it's still used by the Bedouins in this area to this day. But will the new Saudi mega project threaten this history?
There's a city they call the Line, which would go from the coast all the way up into the mountains of Midian. And they just announced this next city, which is up in the mountains of Jebel al-Lawz. This whole mountain range we believe to be the mountain of God. And so you will find, as you drive around the desert, these brand new roads that they're putting in, and this whole camp set up for the workers. So it's a multi-year project. We're just hoping that they don't not just ruin the view, but destroy anything of biblical significance out there.
After more off-roading, we came upon this site, a huge mountain with a peak that appears burned.
The evidence is all around us that this is the true Mount Sinai. Now, I know there are many proposed locations for the mountain of God, but this mountain here in the land of Midian is the only one that matches all the biblical evidence for Mount Sinai, or the mountain of God, or another name is Mount Horeb.
This large plain at the base of the mountain would have easily accommodated the Israelites and all their animals, and Jones tells us more.
Ron White discovered these pieces of marble when he first came here in the mid-1980s. In 1985, he found on one of the sections, written in ancient Hebrew, the name Solomon, the mountain of God, Moses. And so he believed, because of these key words, that King Solomon actually set up a marble shrine dedicated to the mountain of God at the base of Mount Sinai.
And look at this, a large altar centrally placed and covered with petroglyphs. Many of the images depict cows, an animal that in ancient times did not exist out here, but did exist in Egypt. If this is the real Mount Sinai, there was no way I was leaving here without climbing it. The Saudi government has big plans for this whole area, hoping to make it an oasis of modern comfort. But I like it just the way it is, and seeing it with my own eyes made the Exodus story come alive. Wow, I made it. This is the top of Jebel Musa, the mountain of Moses, where God came down and met with Moses to give him the 10 Commandments. What a hike, what a sight. It took about 2.5 hours to get up here, and it was almost 3 miles from where we parked the car, but it was worth every step. And you know, I don't think we'll ever be able to say definitively whether or not this is the actual spot where Moses met with God, but I guess that's just where faith comes in. From northern Saudi Arabia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Still ahead, the threat from China. Xi Jingping on the verge of another 5-year term in office as the head of the Chinese government. So what will extending his power mean for the United States and the world? We're going to take a look right after this. What might a third 5-year term for China's Xi Jingping mean for the United States and the world? Thousands of party leaders gathered for the 20th Chinese Communist Party Congress in Beijing this week, where they applauded Xi's achievement of the past 5 years and laid out plans for his next 5. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Chinese expert, retired Brigadier General Robert Spencer says the party made it clear President Xi is going to wield power for the rest of his life.
You know, there was speculation prior to this that maybe maybe there was a coup, maybe he was being moved out. It's clear that he is going to continue to lead the Chinese Communist Party forward. His speech on Sunday laid out a pretty clear message that the things that people find terribly egregious about the Chinese Communist Party, in particular his leadership of the party, are going to continue and accelerate. So I don't expect much to change in terms of the things that seem to be frustrating to a lot of people out there.
Well, if the CCP is in this continual state of war without rules that you mentioned in your book, specifically then, where do you expect China to dominate militarily? On the sea, with an expanded navy, leaps forward in outer space, cyberspace, AI, where?
Well, I think all of the above. One of the challenges that they'll have now that the Biden administration has really gone after the chip industry, assisting them in elevating their chip technology. I think they're going to be hindered by that, just in their ability to have the most advanced chips. That still means that they do have some chip industry. It's just going to be several generations behind where the United States is. That being said, militarily they're looking pretty squarely at Taiwan, and Xi said that. And I think one of the things that we have to consider is that at any time, particularly after this Party Congress, and then March is when they lay out the next 5-year plan. I can expect, or we can expect that it's possible the Chinese can invade nearly at any time after this Party Congress is over.
How can they afford a conflict with the U.S. right now in Taiwan or anywhere else?
When you look across the nations of the Belt and Road Initiative, they get a lot of energy from Russia and Iran. They have raw materials from countries in Africa and other areas. And so they're going to create their own economy that's based on nations that follow the Chinese model, which is a model of oppression of their people. And, unfortunately for the Chinese, and the Chinese people, they've had access to the U.S. and other free market economies for over 3 decades. That's allowed them to take technology, talent, and capital. So hopefully, going forward, as we recognize the second Cold War, we'll begin to treat these nations, these authoritarian nations, like we did the Soviet Union, and cut them off from that technology, talent, and capital. And the first indication that things are going that way is the fact that the Biden administration just announced that they're going after the Chinese chip industry in a big way. And essentially, when you look at it from the Chinese side, what they're saying is they've essentially decapitated China's ability to evolve their chip industry. So that's a good first start. Clearly not enough, because there's other things like pharmaceuticals and rare earth metals that we've got to get after. But if we keep this up, I think we're on a good path.
And the Chinese government told its citizens in Ukraine this week to evacuate immediately. That warning fueled fears of a Russian nuclear attack in the war there. So what do you make of that?
Well, I am concerned that we're closer to the use of a nuclear weapon than we ever were during the Cold War, precisely because during the Cold War, there was still a respect and fear for those types of weapons. And what I feel that I see today in nations' capitals around the world is this more or less cavalier attitude when nuclear weapons are discussed. Oh, that's not a possibility. Putin would never do that. The weapons never went away, but the seriousness and respect and some of the fear that we had for those weapons has disappeared from capitals around the world, to include Washington, D.C. Now, that gives me great pause, because I do think that we'll be willing to push Putin in ways that we probably wouldn't have done during the Cold War, because we recognize the danger of having those weapons be used. And so, the standoff, for instance, the Cuban Missile Standoff, President Kennedy was wide awake and understood the implications of nuclear war, and understood the seriousness, understood the damage, and the quite, how close we were to destroying humanity. And I think that's the kind of fear and respect that politicians in the West and the free world need to understand, because I know that for a fact that Putin is as seriously considering those weapons, because of the way that he still understands that in many ways those weapons didn't go away, and they're still an important part of his arsenal.
Whatever happened to mutually assured destruction, right? You use them against us, we'll use them against you. So, retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding, author of the book War Without Rules, China's Playbook for Global Domination. We always appreciate your insights. Thanks for being with us, Rob.
Thank you.
Also on this evening's Global Lane program, a Chinese-American immigrant details the similarities between the United States today and China during the Mao's Cultural Revolution. And we'll have a look at the new documentary film, The Real Anthony Fauci. Watch these stories and more on the Global Lane. You can find it tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8:30 Eastern. You can also find it on the CBN News app. Coming up, Israelis and Jewish pilgrims from around the world celebrating a biblical tradition going back to the time of Moses. We'll bring you that story from Jerusalem when we come back. Stay with us. Thousands of Israelis and Jewish pilgrims from around the world packed the Western Wall Plaza in Jerusalem last week as part of Sukkot, the holiday. As CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl tells us, they came to take part in an ancient biblical tradition.
For the first time since the COVID lockdowns, masses of Jewish people streamed through Jerusalem's old city streets to reach the Western Wall. About 50,000 came to take part in the Birkat HaKohanim, or priestly blessing.
Today is an amazing day. It's the holiday of Sukkot, a holiday actually that came to us in the desert.
In the book of Numbers, God gives Moses and Aaron these words to bless the children of Israel. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. While the Aaronic benediction or blessing is a daily part of Jewish prayers, this public tradition happens twice a year during Sukkot and Passover.
It's one of the three pilgrimage festivals that we're actually called to go up on foot to ascend to the temple in the days it existed. Now we only have the Kotel, the Western Wall, remaining from the temple. We're keeping the holiday that was on foot.
Jewish men believed to be part of the priestly line, known as Kohanim, come to bless the people of Israel. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman was among those who blessed the people.
The priests in the temple received the job to bless the people of Israel. Today, actually, they're gathering together thousands of Kohanim here to bless all the people of Israel.
In 2020, many Christians worldwide became more acquainted with the blessing during COVID when international artists translated and sang the Carrie Job and Cody Carnes version of this song over their nations. Another part of the prayers comes from Leviticus 23, where it says to bring the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and rejoice before the Lord. That's why you see branches waved from the palm, willow, and myrtle trees, as well as the citron. And the more that come to bless and be blessed, the better. Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Western Wall, Jerusalem.
We'll see you here tomorrow. Thanks for watching.